People often mistake silence for weakness, but the truth is, your quiet strength has been your greatest power all along. While they underestimated you, overlooked you, and assumed you would stay small, every moment of your calm, every pause, every unspoken word was shaping a force they could never control. And the moment they finally see it, it's too late. People don't always understand the power that lives inside quiet souls. They assume that if you're not loud, you're fragile. If you're not arguing, you're agreeing. If you're not shouting your worth, you must not know it. But the truth is, silence isn't the absence of strength. Sometimes it's the highest form of it. There's a certain kind of silence that doesn't come from fear or insecurity. It comes from clarity, from knowing exactly who you are, from understanding that you don't need to fight every battle just to prove that you can. You don't need to convince anyone of your value because your value is not up for negotiation. And the moment you choose to stay quiet, not because you're powerless, but because you refuse to waste your energy on people who can't hear you, that's when your silence becomes strength. There were times when you held back your words, not because you didn't have anything to say, but because you realized your voice didn't deserve to be drowned in noise. You understood that not every accusation needs a defense, not every disrespect needs a reaction, and not every misunderstanding needs a war. Some people wanted you to explode, to lose control, to fight them on their level, because that would have justified how they treated you. But you refused, not out of weakness, not out of fear, but out of wisdom. There's a story about a woman who chose silence in a moment when others expected chaos. She discovered her partner talking behind her back, minimizing her dreams, making her feel small in front of others. Instead of matching his energy, instead of arguing or begging for respect, she simply went quiet. She didn't storm out. She didn't break down. She just stopped engaging. And that silence spoke louder than anything she could have said. Within days, the man felt the weight of his own words, because her silence handed him something he wasn't prepared to face himself. That's the quiet power you hold. And not everyone sees it at first. Some people see silence and think it's surrender. They think if you're not reacting, you're not aware. But silence is observation. Silence is patience. Silence is the moment when your mind sharpens, your heart steadies, and your intuition wakes up. You start noticing things you were too busy defending yourself to see. The lies become clearer. The manipulation becomes obvious. The disrespect becomes undeniable. And you begin to understand that your silence isn't for them, it's for you. And when someone misreads that silence, when they assume you're weak because you're calm, they start behaving recklessly. They start taking advantage. They start treating you like you won't walk away, like you won't change, like you won't rise. They convince themselves that because you're quiet, you must be fragile. But they forget something essential. Glass breaks from pressure, but steel stays still. And your silence was never glass. It was steel. There's research showing that people often underestimate those who don't outwardly react. It's a psychological bias. Humans assume that emotional control equals emotional dependence. They think the quiet one is the one who cares the most, the one who will stay the longest, the one who will tolerate the most pain. But what they fail to realize is that emotional control is a sign of self-respect. It's the sign of someone who has been broken before and refuses to let anyone take them back there again. And then comes the moment when he realized he had misread you completely, when your silence turned into distance, when your absence turned into a mirror, when the calmness he mocked transformed into the peace he would later search for. It always happens the same way. People don't appreciate the silent ones until the quiet becomes permanent, until the person who never raised their voice suddenly stops speaking altogether. That's when the value becomes undeniable. That's when the regret hits. Think about it. When someone loud leaves, the room gets quieter. But when someone quiet leaves, the world gets emptier. And that emptiness, that's what they feel when they lose someone who loved them softly, patiently, without making noise. Someone who cared without asking for trophies. Someone who stayed even when they weren't understood. That kind of presence is rare, and losing it hurts in ways words can't describe. Your silence wasn't weakness, it was your shield. It was your boundary. It was your way of protecting your peace in a world where many people try to disturb it. You didn't stay quiet because you were afraid to speak. You stayed quiet because you were strong enough not to. Because you understood that silence can carry truth in a way anger never can. Because you knew that the right people would feel that silence, not misinterpret it. And here's the most powerful part: your silence wasn't passive. It wasn't empty. It was active. It was intentional. It was a decision, one that came from your growth, your healing, your maturity. It takes strength to walk away from an argument you could easily win. It takes strength to hold your tongue when you want to defend yourself. It takes strength to let someone believe what they want while you maintain your dignity. It takes strength to understand that not every battle is yours to fight. People who mistake silence for weakness are often the same ones who end up needing the person they dismissed, because the quiet soul they took for granted grows into a force they never expected. A force that doesn't return to chaos. A force that doesn't beg. A force that doesn't break. And maybe that's what happened with you. Maybe he thought you'd never change. Maybe he thought your softness would keep you tied to him forever. Maybe he thought your silence meant he had power over you. But he didn't realize that silence can also mean you're preparing to walk away, to evolve, to become someone he no longer has access to. Your silence was strength because it allowed you to rise in ways words never could. It allowed you to see clearly. It allowed you to heal. It allowed you to outgrow him, outgrow the pain, outgrow the version of yourself that tolerated less than you deserved. And when he finally understood the truth, when he realized you weren't silent out of fear, but out of power, it was already too late. Because by then, you had already stepped into a stronger, wiser, more unstoppable version of yourself, a version built in the quiet, a version shaped in the stillness, a version he never saw coming. And that is the quiet strength he underestimated. That is the silence that changed everything. There's a moment in life when you realize that some people never truly understood the kind of heart you carried. They saw your kindness, but they never understood the strength behind it. They saw the way you showed up, the way you cared, the way you stayed patient even when things got difficult, and they thought it meant you couldn't live without them. They mistook your loyalty for helplessness, your softness for need, your compassion for dependence. But they didn't know you. Not really. You see, kindness is one of the most misunderstood forms of power. It's quiet. It's gentle. It doesn't demand attention. And because of that, people assume it's easy to replace, easy to overlook, easy to take for granted. They think kindness comes from a place of weakness, as if being good to others means you have nothing else to offer. But the truth is, kindness is a choice. A deliberate, conscious choice made by people strong enough to stay open-hearted in a world that often teaches you to close off. You cared not because you were dependent, but because that's who you are. You listened when no one else did, not because you were desperate for connection, but because you respect people enough to understand their pain. You stayed longer than you should have, not because you were afraid of being alone, but because you believed in giving others a chance to meet you where you were. You forgave mistakes that others would have walked away from, not because you thought you needed them, but because you knew what it meant to be human, flawed, and still trying. But when someone doesn't understand the depth of your heart, they start thinking your kindness is tied to them. They start believing that your effort is a sign of emotional dependence. They start assuming that because you give so much, you must need something in return. And when someone begins to think that way, they stop appreciating the beauty of what you bring into their life. They stop valuing your presence. They start thinking they can replace you, ignore you, even disrespect you, because in their mind, you won't go anywhere. It's like watching someone hold a rare flower, but thinking it grows in every field. They don't know the seeds it took to make you. The storms you survived, the way you had to rebuild yourself after every heartbreak. They don't understand that your kindness wasn't something they created. Your kindness existed long before they arrived, and it will exist long after they're gone. There's a psychological study that says people often mistake consistency for dependence. When someone is always there, always supportive, always offering warmth, the human brain begins to see that effort as something natural, something expected. And that's what happened with you. You became his comfort, his calm, his constant. And instead of appreciating it, he began to believe that your presence was guaranteed. But what he didn't understand is that kindness may be gentle, but it is not foolish. A kind heart notices patterns. It senses when it's being used. It feels when the effort isn't returned. And though you gave without keeping score, you also knew when the energy shifted. You noticed when your care was no longer respected, when your patience was being stretched, when your loyalty was being taken for granted. You saw the truth long before he ever realized it. And it's almost ironic. People think you're naive because you're kind, but the reality is you see everything. You just choose not to react immediately. You choose to give people a chance to be better. You choose to believe that they'll understand the value of what you're offering. But when they don't, when they keep assuming that your kindness means you depend on them, something inside you changes. There's a point where kindness becomes exhaustion, a point where giving becomes draining because the person on the other side is only taking. And when you reach that point, your silence becomes louder than all the times you spoke gently. You stopped chasing, not because you didn't care anymore, but because you realized you deserved reciprocity. You stopped explaining your heart because he had already made up his mind about who he thought you were. You stopped trying to prove your intentions because your actions had already said enough. It's funny how regret works. It doesn't come during the moments he was taking you for granted. It comes later, when your absence becomes undeniable, when the warmth you gave him is no longer there to cushion his life, when the consistency he grew comfortable with suddenly disappears. That's when the reality hits. You weren't dependent on him. He was dependent on your kindness. Think about how many people only realize the value of genuine kindness when they lose it. When they step into relationships where effort is replaced by ego, where understanding is replaced by indifference, where communication is replaced by silence. Suddenly, the things that once annoyed him become the things he misses the most. The way you listened, the way you cared, the way you loved without playing games, the way you made him feel safe without asking for anything extra. There's a real-world example psychologists often talk about. People tend to romanticize their past relationships when their current ones lack emotional depth. It's because human beings crave authenticity. They crave genuine connection. They crave the kind of kindness that doesn't need a reason. It just exists. And once you've experienced that kind of warmth, you never forget it. He didn't lose someone who needed him. He lost someone who loved him from a place of strength. Someone who gave because she wanted to, not because she had to. Someone whose heart was big enough to offer grace, but strong enough to walk away when the grace was abused. Your kindness was your power. It made you one of a kind. It made you unforgettable. It made you the kind of person he will look back on years later and think, I was wrong. I misjudged her. I didn't understand what I had. And he will realize something important, something painful but true. You never needed him to feel whole. You were whole before he met you. Your kindness came from your character, not your dependence. And by the time he finally understands that you're no longer there trying to prove anything, because you didn't lose anything by walking away, you simply reclaimed the energy he took for granted. And the world will show you again and again that people like you, people who love deeply, give generously, and feel intensely are rare. Rare enough that losing you becomes one of life's hardest lessons. Your kindness wasn't dependence. It was strength wrapped in softness, and he didn't see it until it was too late. There comes a moment in every journey when you look back and realize just how far you've come. Not because you were trying to outrun someone, not because you wanted to prove something, but because life forced you to choose between staying where you were and becoming who you were meant to be. And you chose growth, you chose evolution, you chose to rise, even when someone else remained exactly where you left them. It's strange how people can share the same moments, the same conversations, even the same pain, yet evolve at completely different speeds. You were both standing at a crossroads, but while you stepped forward, he stayed frozen in place. Maybe he thought time would wait for him. Maybe he believed you would. Maybe he expected you to remain who you were, unchanged, always available, always familiar. But life doesn't work that way. Growth doesn't stop just because someone else refuses to move, and your growth didn't need his permission. While he was busy assuming you'd stay the same, life was shaping you quietly. You were learning from the heartbreaks he didn't notice, from the disappointments he caused, from the patience he took for granted. Every moment of pain became a lesson. Every moment of silence became clarity. Every step he refused to take, you took twice as far. People underestimate the power of slow transformation. They expect growth to announce itself with fireworks, big moments, life-altering events. But your growth happened in the small choices, the nights you decided to heal instead of hurt yourself more, the mornings you chose hope over bitterness, the afternoons you spent working on your dreams instead of waiting for someone to choose you. You didn't realize it at the time, but you were rebuilding from the inside out. Research shows that human beings grow the most during periods of emotional adversity. That heartbreak becomes a catalyst. That disappointment becomes fuel. That grief becomes the fire in which you forge a new version of yourself. And that's exactly what happened with you. You weren't just surviving what he did to you. Your soul was transforming through it. And isn't it something how someone can stay exactly the same while you outgrow every version of who you once were? He stayed comfortable in old habits, old patterns, old ways of seeing the world. He repeated cycles that never brought him peace, but felt familiar enough to cling to. He refused to evolve because evolution requires accountability, humility, and courage. And those are things many run from, especially when facing them means admitting they treated someone wrong. But you embraced the discomfort. You didn't run from the truth. You didn't hide from the lessons. You faced the parts of yourself that were hurting, and with every piece you healed, you grew stronger. Stronger in your self-worth, stronger in your boundaries, stronger in your understanding of what you deserve, stronger in your ability to walk away when someone refuses to meet you halfway. It wasn't revenge that motivated you. It was survival. It was compassion for yourself. You started pouring the energy you once gave to others back into your own life. You started dreaming again, laughing again, believing again, and slowly, people around you began to notice the change, not because you were trying to prove something, but because you were no longer trying to be small enough to fit into someone else's comfort zone. While he remained stuck in the stories he told himself, you were out there writing new chapters. He clung to old versions of you, convinced you'd always be there, always be the same. But the person he remembered was gone, not in a painful way, but in a powerful one. You shed your old self like a skin, leaving behind everything that once kept you tied to him. You stepped into your life with a confidence that came from experience, from resilience, from truth. There's a moment people rarely talk about. The moment when your growth becomes undeniable. Not because you changed your appearance or your lifestyle, but because your energy shifts. You stand differently. You speak differently. You choose differently. You no longer tolerate what once broke you. You no longer chase what once confused you. You no longer apologize for wanting more than bare minimum love. And when he sees that, when he finally realizes that the person he used to know has evolved beyond the places he stayed stuck in, that's when the regret begins. Because he didn't just lose the version of you he knew. He lost the version he never gave himself the chance to grow with. It always hits at the quiet times, in the moments when life feels empty, when he needs someone steady, when his old patterns fail him, when the same cycles he refused to break leave him alone again. That's when your growth becomes clearer than ever, because he stayed still, and stillness always slows a person down. It traps them in memories, in regrets, in unlearned lessons. Meanwhile, growth moves forward, always forward. Maybe he'll look at you one day and not recognize the person standing there. The strength in your eyes, the peace in your expression, the confidence in your silence, not because you became someone else, but because you finally became yourself. And he'll realize something painful but real. He never took the chance to walk beside you while you were evolving. He stayed behind while you kept moving, kept healing, kept rising. And that gap, the one created by his stagnation and your growth, is the very distance that now separates your worlds. But you should know something important. You didn't grow to make him regret anything. You grew because life asked you to. Growth was never a punishment for him. It was a reward for you. A reward for surviving what tried to break you. A reward for choosing yourself when someone else didn't. A reward for believing there was more waiting for you, even when you couldn't see it yet. While he stayed still, you grew, and that growth became your freedom. It became your path. It became your story. A story he may never be part of again, not because you're bitter, but because you simply outgrew the place where he chose to remain. And that is the quiet truth. You didn't leave him behind. He stayed behind while you learned how to fly. There comes a point in life when the waiting becomes heavier than the hope. When you find yourself stuck in moments that never move, watching days turn into months, hoping that someone will finally choose you with the same certainty you once chose them. But there's a quiet awakening that happens inside a person, a moment when the soul whispers, you don't have to wait anymore. And that whisper, that small shift, becomes the spark that changes everything. It's the moment you stopped waiting and started living. Waiting for someone who isn't ready has a way of stealing pieces of you without you noticing. You start holding back your dreams just in case they finally show up. You shrink your happiness so it won't intimidate them. You live half-heartedly because the other half is tied to a promise that keeps breaking itself. You tell yourself it's loyalty, but deep down, it's fear. Fear of what life will look like without them. Fear of starting over. Fear of facing the unknown. And yet, the unknown is exactly where your future was waiting to meet you. There's a story I once heard about a woman who spent years waiting for the man she loved to change. She waited through apologies that never turned into action, through promises that dissolved in silence, through cycles that repeated themselves like a loop she couldn't escape. She waited because she believed love meant patience. But one morning, she looked in the mirror and didn't recognize the tired eyes staring back at her. That's when she realized she wasn't waiting for love. She was waiting for loss to stop hurting. And that was the day she chose to live. Your own moment may not have been loud. Maybe it happened on a quiet evening when you finally heard your heartbeat louder than your longing. Maybe it happened on a morning when you woke up and felt a strange sense of peace in the space where the pain used to sit. Maybe it happened in a single breath, the kind that feels like the first real breath you've taken in months. Whatever it looked like, it was the moment you decided to stop waiting for someone who wasn't choosing you and instead started choosing yourself. It takes courage to walk away from a place where your heart is invested, even when that place is slowly draining you. It takes strength to acknowledge that waiting has turned into wasting time, energy, love, potential. You weren't weak for waiting. You were hopeful. You were human, but you became powerful when you stopped. Psychologists talk about something called delayed identity, the way people can put their entire life on pause because they're emotionally tethered to a future that may never happen. When you stopped waiting, you broke that pattern. You stopped building your life around someone else's indecision, and you started shaping it with your own hands. That shift wasn't just emotional, it was psychological freedom, a liberation of your identity, your time, your worth. And once you stepped into that freedom, something amazing happened. You remembered who you were before the waiting started. You remembered the dreams you set aside, the passions you buried, the talents you forgot you had. You started saying yes to opportunities instead of postponing them for someday. You started laughing again, really laughing, from the place where joy lives. You started reconnecting with people who lifted you up. You started realizing that your life is not a waiting room for someone else's readiness. The world opened up for you, not because it suddenly changed, but because you finally showed up to live in it. You began to travel, create, work, heal, explore, rise. You found beauty in the smallest things, strength in the quietest moments, and hope in the most unexpected places. And the best part, you didn't need anyone's permission to do it. While you were living, he was still in the same place, thinking you'd always be there, thinking you'd always wait. People often believe they can keep someone on pause while they sort themselves out. They assume loyalty means stillness. They assume patience means permanence. But they forget that the human soul is not a stationary thing. It's meant to grow, to move, to evolve. When he finally looked back, he didn't find you waiting in the same spot anymore. Instead, he found a version of you he didn't expect, lighter, wiser, stronger, more alive. And that's when the reality hit him. You didn't leave him behind. You didn't punish him. You simply lived. You grew into the person you were meant to be, and the distance between you became the natural result of that growth. He might replay memories, trying to understand the moment he lost you. He might look for you in other people, hoping to find even a shadow of the warmth you once gave so freely. But he will realize that he mistook your presence for permanence. He never imagined a world where you would stop waiting because he never understood how painful it was for you to wait in the first place. But you see, life rewards those who choose themselves. It rewards those who stand up after being overlooked. It rewards those who rebuild after being broken. By choosing to live, you opened doors he never even knew existed. You discovered pieces of yourself he never saw because he never looked deep enough. You became someone whose life is too full to shrink back into someone else's hesitation. And that's the beautiful, undeniable truth. Once you stopped waiting, you became unstoppable. You stepped into a life that was always meant for you, a life filled with possibility, joy, purpose, and people who recognize your worth without needing to lose you first. You became proof that the end of waiting is not the end of love. It's the beginning of self-love. Proof that healing is not forgetting, it's transforming. Proof that living isn't something you do later, it's something you claim now. And in the quiet strength of your new life, there is a message written in every step you take forward. You didn't lose anything by stopping the wait. You found everything by choosing to live. There's a moment in life when you realize that you didn't need anyone else to define who you are. Not their approval, not their love, not their recognition. You were always capable of becoming the person you were meant to be. And the moment someone else doubted you, underestimated you, or left you behind, that became the catalyst for your transformation. You became who you were destined to be without him. And in that truth, there is a power so deep and undeniable that it can't be taken away by anyone who failed to see it. It starts quietly, almost imperceptibly. At first, you don't even notice it. You simply begin making choices for yourself, small decisions that assert your value, your time, your energy. You begin to invest in your own dreams, even when no one is cheering you on. You start saying yes to opportunities that excite you and no to the things that drain you. You start recognizing the difference between people who contribute to your life and people who subtract from it. And in those quiet choices, your destiny begins to unfold. He may have assumed that your worth was tied to him, that your happiness depended on his presence. He may have believed that you couldn't thrive without his validation. But the truth is, the human spirit is designed to rise. It's designed to adapt, to heal, to grow. And when someone leaves you or fails to appreciate the person you are, they don't stop the process of your becoming. They simply remove the distraction that kept you from discovering your own strength. There is a profound freedom in realizing that your life is yours alone. You start to understand that waiting for someone to see your value is a waste of time, because your value is inherent. It was never theirs to give. And in that realization, you begin to build a version of yourself that could never have existed if you had stayed tied to their doubts or limitations. Every step you take forward, every lesson you learn, every challenge you face becomes a brick in the foundation of who you are becoming. You embrace growth in every form. You learn resilience from the pain he caused. You find wisdom in the mistakes that were once disguised as heartbreak. You cultivate strength from the moments when you felt alone, and you begin to notice something extraordinary each struggle, each moment of disappointment, each encounter with someone who failed to recognize your worth was actually a gift. It was a gift that taught you patience, endurance, and self-reliance. It was a gift that taught you that you were never lost, never broken, never incomplete. You simply hadn't fully realized your potential yet. As you evolve, you become a person he never expected. You don't just survive without him, you thrive. Your confidence no longer wavers at the memory of rejection. Your joy no longer depends on his presence. Your achievements, your happiness, your peace are not measured by whether he notices or approves. And that is the hardest truth for someone like him to accept, that he cannot influence, control, or diminish the person you have become. Your power exists independently of him, and that power grows every day. There's a story that mirrors this transformation, a story of someone who faced doubt, betrayal, and absence, yet emerged as their fullest self. A person who was underestimated, overlooked, and abandoned, yet used those very experiences as fuel to build a life of purpose, impact, and self-respect. They discovered that the only validation that truly matters comes from within, and once they embraced that truth, they were unstoppable. Their light grew too bright for anyone who couldn't see it, and that light illuminated a path they could only walk alone, or with those who were ready to respect it. When you become who you were destined to be without him, the contrast is unmistakable. He may remain tied to the version of you he once knew, the version that was quieter, more patient, more forgiving, but that person no longer exists. You've outgrown that old version of yourself, just as you've outgrown the people who could not keep pace with your growth. And in that outgrowing, there is a liberation so profound that nothing can pull you back. You no longer look for permission to live fully. You no longer seek someone else's approval to define your worth. You simply are. And the beauty of it is, your life becomes irresistible, not because you are trying to prove anything, but because authenticity always shines brighter than pretense. You move through the world with purpose, confidence, and peace, and people notice, not just him, but everyone around you. They see the courage it took to stop waiting for someone who couldn't see you, the strength it took to heal and keep moving, the wisdom it took to trust yourself above all else. And they respect it, they respect you, they learn from it, and for the first time, you realize that your destiny was never dependent on anyone else's understanding or recognition. Your life, your growth, your success, they are yours. The power of becoming who you were meant to be without him is not just in the independence it gives you, but in the clarity it brings. You see that love, respect, and companionship are not about possession. They are about alignment. They are about people walking beside you, not holding you back. They are about choosing freely and consciously, not clinging out of fear or ignorance. And when you understand that, you start living in a way that no one can diminish. The most important lesson in this transformation is that you don't need anyone to validate your journey. You don't need someone to realize your strength for it to exist. You don't need someone to recognize your worth for it to be undeniable. And the moment you internalize that truth, your life changes completely. You become unstoppable. You become fearless. You become radiant in ways that weren't possible when you were waiting for someone else's recognition. And eventually, he will notice, but it will be too late. By the time he sees the person you've become, the space he left in your life has already been filled with your own light, your own love, your own power. He will realize that he underestimated you, that he misjudged you, that he took for granted the person who was quietly building herself into someone extraordinary. But your destiny was never his to control. It was always yours to claim. In the end, becoming who you were destined to be without him is more than just survival. It's triumph. It's self-discovery. It's the realization that the only person who truly determines your worth, your growth, and your life is you. Every lesson he taught you, every moment he doubted you, every time he left, these became the stepping stones toward the person you are today. And that person, resilient, fearless, unapologetic, radiant, is unstoppable. Because you don't need him. You don't need anyone who couldn't see you. You don't need approval, validation, or acknowledgement from those who underestimated you. Your life, your power, your destiny, they exist independently of anyone else. And in that truth, you finally understand what it means to be unstoppable, unshakable, and wholly yourself. You became who you were destined to be without him, and in doing so, you showed the world something extraordinary, that the greatest transformations happen not because someone stayed, but because you chose to rise, to heal, to claim your life, and to step fully into the person you were always meant to be. And that's the truth of your journey. Every moment of silence, every act of kindness, every step of growth, every choice to live fully, and every transformation you embraced without him, all of it led you to become unstoppable. You didn't wait for validation. You didn't depend on someone else to define your worth, and you didn't let anyone else hold the power over your life. You chose yourself, you rose, and you became the person you were always meant to be. And now, standing in your strength, you shine brighter, live freer, and inspire the world around you, proof that true power always comes from within.